3 years ago, I'd had enough of the rat race in the United States, and so I got rid of almost everything that I owned, and I moved down here to a small Caribbean island to pursue a simpler, more meaningful life. When I did, I had no idea that soon 1 million people would follow me on TikTok, participating in this great adventure that I'm on, and coming along with me on the adventures that I did all over the world. And then one day I told a story about how the cenotes, or the sacred caves of the Maya in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, were formed. And the next thing I know, 8.4 million people had watched it. And then I told another story, and 3.4 million people watched it. And another story, and 3.1 million people watched it. So now I walk on the beach on my small Caribbean island, and I tell stories. And now on this YouTube channel, I'm going to tell you about my life down here on this small Caribbean island of Utila, Honduras. I'm going to take you along on adventures all over the world. In a little while, we're going to go to the Lycian Way and hike across Turkey. I'm going to show you what it was like to dive the atomic fleet in Bikini Atoll, one of the most radioactive places in the world. And I'm going to continue to share stories with you. And I'd like to share some of the stories that I've told in the past. The first one is the story about the cenotes. Honestly, I told this story almost by accident. It wasn't what I usually did, but I was going to go scuba diving inside of the cenotes, and I needed to put something up on TikTok. So I quickly told the story about how they were formed, loaded it up, and went under the water, swimming far back into the cave. And when I came up, like 1 million people had already seen it. The second story is about an ancient waterfall that's under the water not far from here. You see, the water here used to be much, much lower during the Ice Age, and you can see that ancient waterfall. Then I'm going to tell you about how you're subconsciously manipulated every time you go into a grocery store. And finally, I'm going to tell you about a Russian fighter pilot that defected in a daring act of bravery that would put Tom Cruise to shame. So pull up a chair and let me tell you some stories. The meteor that killed the dinosaurs, it hit 50 miles from here. At the time, the whole Yucatan Peninsula was underwater, and it would be that way for millions of years. The reef and shells built up over time till they were 3,500 feet deep, and it stayed underwater until the last ice age. When that ice began to form over North America and Europe, all the water that had been in that ocean got drawn up onto the land. Ocean levels dropped 200 feet lower than they are now. It's hard to imagine that, but it was. Like the Blue Hole in Belize, it's 2.5 hours to get out there. That used to be above water. And when that happened, that shelf, 3,500 feet of limestone, came up out of the water. What is now a big chunk of Mexico literally came up out of the water for the first time. The rain was acidic, and so as it fell, it went down through that limestone in little cracks and began to corrode it away and create a big cave system. In some areas, the cave broke in the middle, and that section collapsed down, and it created what's called the cenote, or the Mayans named it water tank, because it's jungle now, but back then, 5,000 years ago, it was arid. And so the Mayans that lived here would build their civilizations around these cenotes and then rely on the rainwater that was collecting inside of them, like this. But then when the Ice Age ended, the water level came back up again, and these caves that have been primarily empty began to fill up with water. There's two types of water here. There's salt water from the groundwater, because as the ocean came up, it began to push up in the water table. And so at the bottom of these cenotes, you'll find salt water. And then at the top, rainwater comes down and fills this up. So this here is fresh water, but go down a little bit, 30 feet, you're in salt water. That meant that these caves that used to be primarily dry began to fill up with water. So way in the back of them, you will find artifacts of humans far, far back in there that are now completely underwater. And way offshore, you will find caves in there that also have human remains in them, because that used to be above water. That's what happens when ice sheets melt. Sea levels go up. Here, they went up 200 feet. So we're at a cenote called the Two Eyes. This particular cenote was undiscovered until 1985, when Hurricane Mitch hit Mexico. It destroyed the jungle. And for the first time, helicopters over could see down into the jungle, and they saw two eyes looking back up to them. Two cenotes. 1989, National Geographic went into the jungle and found these. These link 47 miles of caves down in here. And today we're gonna go dive. You see that sign? It said forbidden to cross. That's where we're gonna go. All that used to be dry land. When woolly mammoths walked the earth, the ocean level was 240 feet lower during the last ice age. I'm going to prove it to you because right underneath that water, 200 feet down, is an ancient waterfall, and I'm going to take you there. Most scuba divers stay way up there, a mere 20 meters or about 60 feet under the water. But to get where we're going, we got to go deep, very, very deep, 60 meters or 200 feet down. And this is a very special place. You see, on my left is a cliff that's on the very edge of the Caribbean tectonic plate. And just to my right, that's the Atlantic plate. Go half a mile to my right and you're in 10,000 feet of water before you go over the edge into the Cayman Trench, where it's 7,686 meters deep. That's 25,216 feet, a depth caused by these two tectonic plates hitting each other. You know you're deep when you find one of these. This is a giant shield coral, and they only grow between 20 and 50 meters deep. This coral has been here longer than the United States of America has been a country. And here's what we came looking for. You see that V notch at the top? That's the top of the waterfall. And then you see the chute coming down and dropping out at the bottom. To give you an idea of size, that little stretch from the V to where it comes out is 40 meters or about 121 feet. You see, during the ice ages, water evaporates out of the ocean, goes up in the clouds and falls as rain on the land. But instead of being able to run back down to the ocean, it was caught in giant ice flows that covered North America, Europe, and Asia. That caused the ocean levels to drop. And all of this used to be dry land. And in front of us was a torrential waterfall. We're swimming up one of the little side waterfalls to the left of the main waterfall, and as we crest the top, you can see the ancient river that used to feed it. Then the walls of this gully were filled with plants instead of coral, and where fish now swim, birds flew. Until the ice floes melted, the sea rose and entombed this ancient waterfall, giving us the perfect place to dive. One of the most bizarre studies about how to manipulate people was published in 1999. Scientists placed subjects at the end of a long hall and gave them a piece of paper with a number on it. Some of the numbers only were 2 digits long, others as many as 7. We're told to memorize the number and then walk to the other end of the hall and write it down on a sheet of paper. Scientists congratulated them on how well they could remember the number and told them that it would take them a little while to tally up the results, and while they were waiting to help themselves at the food cart. And the food cart had either a fruit plate or cake. Everyone thought it was a memory test, but that had nothing to do with it. It was really about whether they chose fruit or cake. You see, the people that got 2-digit numbers, half of them chose fruit and half of them chose cake. Because let's be honest, we all want cake, but we know we shouldn't. So about half of us are able to think, I should really eat the fruit instead. The people that had to remember a 7-digit number, almost none of them chose fruit. They all chose cake. What they were experiencing is something called cognitive fatigue. You see, your brain is like any other muscle. It gets tired. Because they had to concentrate so hard on remembering a 7-digit number, their brain got tired. And so it became less resilient to the idea that they should eat healthy. And the more primitive part of their brain, the part that wanted that nice, fat, sugary cake, took over. That was a watershed moment in how businesses could manipulate their consumers into making bad choices in purchasing. So now let's take a walk through your supermarket. Most supermarkets are not going to have the door in the middle of the front of the store. Instead, the door or the doors will be on either side. That's because people are kind of like rats in a maze. we like to turn to the wall. So when you go in, you're going to turn to whichever side that door is closest to. So if it's on the left side of the store, you're going to go to the left wall. If it's on the right side of the store, you're going to go to the right wall. And they want you to do that. See, either wall is going to have one of two things. It's almost always vegetables or a bakery. Sometimes flowers, because that works the same as a bakery. You see, when you smell fresh bread or fresh flowers, you have a pleasant experience. And if you're feeling good, you're more likely to buy stuff. That's why when you go to a resort in Las Vegas, they all pipe in a smell because they're trying to make you feel good. And they want you to start your shopping experience in the vegetable section, because the intellectual part of your brain, the part you got to work at, knows you should eat healthy. And so it wants you to have lots of zucchini. Your meat and your dairy products are almost always at the back of the store. That's where you're going to go next. After you go up that wall full of vegetables, you're going to hit the dairy and you're going to hit the meat, and you're going to be more likely to buy those products while you're still fresh. Then they're going to make you go up and down aisle after aisle, often looking for stuff. You ever wonder why you can't find something where you think it's supposed to be? It's because they don't want you to. They want you to keep looking for it. And you're going to have to look through 1,700 kinds of spaghetti sauce. And it's hard to figure out which one that you're supposed to get. And they want to make it a little hard for you too. They're trying to wear you out. You ever wondered why there's not an essentials aisle at a supermarket? The place where you can go where 90% of what you want is just right there. I mean, we all want the same stuff. Why don't they have an aisle like that? Because they don't want you to have an aisle like that. They want you to walk up and down aisle after aisle, getting slowly more and more tired, more and more likely to just do an impulse buy and reach over and buy that box of sugary syrup. Also, subconsciously control what you look at as you're going up and down those aisles. You know, they use eye tracking software to look where people look. And they see that they usually look at eye level. And so those are going to be the items that they want to sell you more. The stuff down on the bottom nobody looks at, that's going to be the stuff they make the least profit on. The stuff in the middle, that's what they want you to buy. So you've just gone down an exhausting aisle of spaghetti sauce. And you get to the end, and there's an end gondola there. You know, that end part that has the deal on the cookies or the chips or the beer. That's prime real estate, because studies show that after you go down that aisle full of spaghetti sauces that you've had to try and figure out, and without even realizing it, you're a little tired, when you make that turn, you're more likely to reach out and to buy that item. And then you finally get in the line, and what's there? All the chocolate, all the candy, all the stuff you would never buy normally. But fatigue brings impulse buying. This is just one of the tricks that companies use in order to sell you stuff you don't want. Have you spend your money on things you don't need. And it's not going to work every time. Sometimes you know you only need a can of peaches and you go and get the can of peaches and leave. But it works enough of the time. It's a numbers game for them. If they can get most of the people, most of the time, to buy extra stuff that they don't need, well, then they won. And you never even knew you lost. Tom Cruise stealing an F-14 from a Russian base in Top Gun is cool, but not nearly as cool as the real life story about the Russian who knocked out a Russian military base, stole their most advanced fighter, defected with it to the West, and then stood on the wings, holding his hands in the air and saying, "Finally, I'm an American." Alexander Zhuev was a Russian fighter pilot flying their most advanced fighter craft, the MiG-29. But he had become disillusioned with communism and his life there. He wanted out. So in May 1989, he went to the airbase where he was stationed, and he called all of the pilots together and made an announcement. His wife was pregnant, and to celebrate, he'd brought them a strawberry cake. He laced it with tranquilizers, but he was a pilot, not a doctor, and so he kind of went overboard. It not only knocked them all out, it put them all in the hospital. He had just taken out all the pilots who would have chased him down and tried to kill him once he left. He needed to cut off this airbase from any other nearby air bases so that they couldn't call and warn. So he cut the telephone lines. He went to the hangar where his MiG-29 was stored, and he found a mechanic there keeping guard. He told him that he was there to relieve him and that it was okay, he could leave early, and so the man left. Alexander started readying his plane for takeoff, including arming it with missiles. He knew he might have to fight his way out. Suddenly, the mechanic burst into the hangar again. He had found the unconscious pilots, and he came at Alexander hard. Now, Alexander had been a champion wrestler, but it turned out so had the mechanic. The two of them fought fiercely until finally the mechanic was able to get his gun out and shot Alexander in the arm. Alexander was able to get the gun away and ended the fight. Bloodied and exhausted, Alexander crawled into the cockpit and finished the startup procedure, but nothing happened. It wouldn't turn on. Alexander knew then that he was dead. They were going to shoot him as a deserter. But Alexander closed his eyes, tried to breathe calmly and relax. And then he went through the startup procedure again. This time, the giant engines roared to life. And that's when things became more difficult. His plan was to fly to Turkey, but between him and Turkey lay the Soviet air defense system with its radars and its surface-to-air missiles and airfields prickling with other fighter planes anxious to shoot him down. And then he would have to penetrate the Turkish air defense system and land on one of their bases, all without getting shot down. Like in Top Gun, Alexander flew below the radar, flying mere meters off of the ground and hiding in canyons at breakneck speed and weaving back and forth to take advantage of weak spots that he had found in the air defense fields. Finally, he broke out over the Black Sea, but here there was nowhere to hide, and so he flew right on the deck and hoped that nobody was behind him. He used his training to penetrate the Turkish air defenses and then climb so that they could see him on their radar and call Turkish air control and ask for permission to land. They said no. He landed anyway. As the Turkish guards rushed towards his plane, he stood on the wing, raised his hands, and said, "Finally, I am an American." It was the only English phrase that he knew. And then in Russian, he said, "I am shot. Take me to the hospital." Alexander's presence put the Turkish government in quite a pickle. They wanted to please their U.S. allies who demanded the plane and the pilot, but they also didn't want to provoke the Soviet bear right on their borders, who were demanding the immediate return of Alexander and the MiG-29. Their decision was very Solomonic. They gave the U.S. the pilot and the Soviets the plane. The United States Air Force debriefed Alexander for 6 months and then gave him amnesty and citizenship and a very large trust fund that would allow him to live comfortably the rest of his life. Thank you for listening to my stories, and I hope that you liked them. And if you did, I hope that you'll subscribe and come back and listen to some more.